Hello, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Ruth Rankine, who's the Director of Primary Care at the NHS Confederation. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you, Linda. It's lovely to be here.
So, as you're probably aware, during this series of podcasts, we're interviewing women who have found their leader within. And it's an opportunity for people aspiring to have careers in the NHS to learn from those of us who've kind of gone before them. So it would be really helpful, I think, if you could tell us a little bit about your career pathway and how you've come to be where you are today.
Of course. So I think, like a lot of people, I haven't had a traditional career pathway. So I graduated actually with business studies and languages. So I didn't expect to end up in the health service. But so that happened by accident, actually. But I guess it opened my eyes to a world that I really knew nothing about. And I guess over time, it's become clear to me that I look for roles where I can make a difference. And I really enjoy roles where I'm sort of starting with a blank sheet of paper and creating something new or building something. And as well as that, I always look for roles where I'm learning. So whether it's about a new sector or a new skill. So I think over time, that has shaped the different types of roles that I've gone for. And I think that because I think part of that is people can often stay in roles for too long, and you become sort of safe and stuck in your comfort zone. So, and I guess having worked in the civil service where you're encouraged, when you're in sort of training, you're encouraged to move around regularly. I think that has become ingrained in me in terms of I reach a point where it just feels, it's time to move on. So, and I think, people often say, oh, where do you see yourselves in 5 to 10 years time? And, I've never had that sort of career pathway or career trajectory. I've sort of looked at different roles, along the lines I've said. So, and I've done lots of different things, but I feel that has made me more rounded as an individual and given me a much greater breadth of understanding of the system.
And I think one thing that you said there really stands out, because it's something I'm quite often asked when I'm coaching people, is how do they know when it's the time to move on? What would you say the triggers are for when you know it's time to move on?
So I think when you feel you have done as much as you can and you stop making a difference, and that every day sort of feels the same. So, and of course, we all go through sort of weeks where it's just like Groundhog Day. But I think in terms of the horizon, if you can, I'm sort of much the displeasure of my team, always looking for new things to do, new things to try, new ideas, to keep moving forward and building bigger and better and continually improving. So I think if you end up sort of with, where your heart isn't in it anymore, I think deep down, it's time to move on.
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it? Listening to what your heart tells you, because it doesn't lie, does it?
It doesn't. And of course, not everybody, including me, is in a situation where sort of, you can, if you're that unhappy or, you sort of feel that you can't do anything more, that you can just give up and wait for the next opportunity. So I think it's also about how do you manage that transition, if you've sort of made the decision that the time is right, but you actually haven't found, the next role. It's how you maintain the momentum during that period is quite difficult.
Yes, yes, I see that quite often. So how would you actually describe your leadership style?
So I think, I mean, it's a hard one because this is a typical interview question, isn't it? And I think I don't have one particular style because I think you use different leadership styles for different situations. And I think my leadership style has changed as well over the years. But I think, so in some cases, you're up against it, time's tight, and you just need to make a decision and kind of take the team along with you in terms of the decision you've made. But then obviously at other times you've got more time for a more collaborative approach where you've got an idea and but you want sort of a more collaborative approach in terms of forming the detail around that idea and getting different perspectives and listening to your team, listening to their concerns, building that in. So I think it's my style does vary. I think on the whole, for me, it's about setting a sort of a direction of travel. And not necessarily being specific about how we're going to get there, because I think that then enables you to bring people with you and they can feel that they can shape the sort of not necessarily the end point, but how we get there. And it's giving people the time, because I think everybody sort of works in different ways. So some people will be like straight on it. Yeah, okay, got it, let's go. Whereas others are a bit more, hang on a minute, I just need time to think about this, reflect on it, and I'll then sort of come back to you and sort of share my thoughts. So I think it's also about how you good leadership is also adapting to different styles within your team and how people respond to a changing situation. I mean, and I don't like to micromanage, but I am on top of the detail. So, and those things sometimes, rub up against each other. But I guess, for me, the way I learned or the way I developed most and learned the most was when people sort of said, off you go. And if you've got any questions, come back to you. So sort of not thrown in at the deep end, but thrown in at the deep end, knowing that support framework is there. So, and I guess that's sort of a lot of my style is setting that direction, but letting people then think about how they want to take that forward and checking back in terms of if they've got any questions.
I think again on a lot of our leadership courses, people think that you need, you have your one style, but what you've just described is very clearly how you need to adapt to different people and different situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think without that, if you stick to one route, as you've said, it would not succeed. People would fall flat on their face. So can you recall a couple of standout defining moments that actually made you rethink, and what have they given you?
I mean, I guess just because I've worked in so many different roles at different levels and using different expertise, it's quite hard to, there's lots. I guess if I think of a couple, so one was in about early 2000, and I was working in the Department of Health, and my role was to set up walk-in centres. So Labour had obviously come into power in 97, and this was one of their new ideas. So they announced it, and with obviously little detail as to what it actually meant or how it was going to work. So I literally started in the role with a press release, and that was it. And they said, we want 20 walk-in centres within 12 months. So that was, major thrown in at the deep end. But to be honest, 12 months later, we'd opened 42. And I think that obviously, setting something like that up from scratch, and they were all across the country, and it was about workforce, it was about IT, it was about estates, it was about relationships with the rest of the system, it was about getting people on board, so communications. And I think, sometimes we're in a situation where we think we have to do everything and we don't know everything. And I think what that really taught me was about how you identify the expertise that you need, and you find that expertise to work with you in a sort of a team-based approach. And I think the other learning for that was it brought me into really close contact with ministers and with Number 10, because it was sort of a key government initiative. And going back to the point about, I do detail. I guess on that one, I kind of had to be on top of the detail of all of them. And there was sort of one moment that stands out in my memory around all of that, was that I'd hurt my back. So I was sort of, trying to manage to sit and at work at the set. I was working from home at the same time as lying on the floor. And I got a call from the special advisor at Number 10 asking me for an update, on how things were going. And when he said an update, he didn't just mean like a general update. He meant, I want to know what's happening in every one of the 42. So I just have this memory of lying on the floor on my back with the phone in my hand, just literally, talking him through the detail of each one of the 42. So, and he expected me to know the detail, and it was kind of, and if I hadn't, obviously, it then sort of looks like, well, have you really got a grip of this? Yeah. So I think, that taught me about the importance of detail. But that can be challenging for people who work for you, if you're on top of the detail, and more so than they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the other thing that I've sort of learned is, when you're working in national roles, people in the NHS often feel you're really far removed from reality and what goes on. So it was really important for me, even though I was in the department and in policy roles, that I spent time in the NHS understanding how my policy area, or the initiative I was leading on, would translate on the ground. And actually that helped me deliver and develop a much better policy. But there is always that challenge when you go out, what would you know? You're from the sort of department. And I remember one GP said to me, like, what would you know about any of this? So I think for me, the other sort of learning from that is the importance of building those relationships and connecting with people on their level, and really taking time to listen to people's perspectives and concerns. Not that you can always do anything, do something about it, but I think just listening.
I think listening is a fundamental leadership skill that people brush over.
I'm not saying I do it perfectly all of the time, but it is there as a really important thing to do.
Yes, because what I often say is, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a particular reason.
Absolutely.
So you actually alluded to this next question a little bit when we started the introduction, but what was it that really drew you to the health service?
So I ended up completely by accident, so I'd left university, I was looking for a job, I was temping, and one of the skills that I'd learned was sort of touch typing, which, unbeknown to me at that time, was was a great skill to have. So I ended up starting in the health service in a temporary role as a PA, and then from that I had a great boss who was really supportive and gave me lots of opportunities. And because of, I guess, my nature, I'm really curious, and I sort of set myself really high expectations. So I always want to give 110%. So I think she saw something in me, and then an opportunity came up there, which I applied for and was successful. So and the rest is history. But I sort of it's true to say, I started at the bottom and worked my way up.
No, absolutely. And so you mentioned your boss at that time and how she saw something in you and encouraged you. Are there any people that particularly stand out that have inspired you along the way?
So many, and I obviously don't want to name people, but I think if I think about those that sort of made the biggest impact on me, it's really about how they approach certain situations, and what that said about their leadership, and some of the best bosses I've had have been able to have fun as well, which is I think is really important, because life is hard enough. So I think if you can have some fun along the way, it's always a good thing. I think the other key thing that I learned was sometimes you're in a meeting and discussions can be difficult, but actually it's the conversation that happens outside of the meeting that can be more important than what happens inside the meeting room. So talking to people ahead of the meeting, talking to them about what you want to share, understanding any difficulties or challenges they might have with the topic, that you can talk that through before you go into the room. So you're not sort of put in that difficult situation within the room. Or, if you're in the room and a difficult situation arises, just I think asking for the time to think it through rather than reacting straight away, and coming out and then talking to those individuals outside of the room. And over a number of roles, I've had much more success through that approach than I have actually had in the meeting itself.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because quite a lot of people feel so pressured in a meeting to come up with the answer that there's a tendency just to say something, and then it often makes a rod for their own back, doesn't it?
And it was one of the very early things that my coach said to me was, it's okay to say, I haven't got that information at the minute, but I'll come back to you.
No, absolutely. So do you think women lead differently from men, or do you think that's just a bit of a smokescreen?
To be honest, I've never, I've had great women leaders and not so great women leaders. I personally, I have never sort of seen any difference. I sort of think women may have more empathy, but equally I've seen male leaders and some of my ex-bosses who've been incredibly empathetic and understanding. And I think, I think sometimes people try and see differences, and they look for problems that may not be there. I mean, in my particular world at the moment, there's often a challenge between those who are clinicians and those who are managers.
Yes.
And for me, you need both. And some of my biggest achievements have been where I've been working alongside clinicians, as a real team, and we obviously bring different skills and knowledge. But interestingly, I was on a call with someone earlier today, and who is a clinician, who's a GP, and I've known her for years. And she said to me, "So how many clinical sessions do you do a week?" And I said, "I'm not a clinician." And she was like, she's, "Oh,
that's
I
a huge
always
compliment."
Thought you were well, it's either I'm not sure if it is a compliment. It could be, might not be. But so I think again, it's just that people come from different roles with different experience and different knowledge and different skills. And it's just connecting with people, over a common issue or a piece of work, and recognizing the strengths that you each bring to that.
Yeah, that's very true. So you've obviously had a busy life and a busy career. So how do you maintain balance in your life, or indeed do you? And what nurtures you?
It is hard because honestly, I think all of my life, I've, even in my holiday jobs at school, I've kind of, work has been everything. And I think that's partly down to my upbringing. So I do give 110%. But I love my work, I love working. Although I think as I've got older, my home life has become more important. And I think, the pandemic affected us all.
Yeah.
And I think, you sort of get more comfortable with sort of being at home and valuing what you've got at home. And we got a lockdown puppy. So she's now 3, and she gets me out every day, and it's a great excuse. And she's not particularly amused when I'm walking around a field on the phone to work or doing emails on my phone. Or if I'm sitting on the sofa, she's sort of pawing my hand if I'm on the laptop. And as funny as it is, it makes you stop and think.
Yeah.
And it's actually, what am I doing in this minute? And she wants attention, and so it's hard to separate, particularly when you work from home a lot, to separate sort of work and home life. But yeah, and I think I've got lots of great colleagues who are friends, and I think the other really important thing is to have that sort of friendship group who just keep you grounded. And actually they're not particularly interested in your work, or you might think there's some disaster happening at work, but kind of they don't see it, so they help you to sort of see a different perspective.
So if there's one thing you could be remembered for, what would you like that to be?
I think someone who is fair, and treats people well, and respects sort of different skills, experience, and backgrounds, but knows how to have fun at the same time.
So important, isn't it? So as we wind up our conversation today, I just wonder whether you have a piece of advice that you would like to share with somebody starting out in their NHS career.
So I was thinking about this earlier, and so I have 3 pieces of advice. So I think the first one is work hard. That doesn't mean work long hours, but work hard but smart, and be ambitious. If you want to sort of move into senior roles, I think you've got to demonstrate you're ambitious, and be curious about what's happening around you. Ask questions, because although it doesn't necessarily seem directly relevant possibly in the moment or in your role, just getting that broader understanding of what's going on around you. I think, it just helps to portray you as a much more informed and rounded person. I think the second point is, as we've talked about, don't stick to one organisation or one job for too long, because again, it's about developing a broad set of skills and knowledge, and that makes you stand out against others. And I think the third one, which is, one of the most important to me, is building your network. Build great relationships that will see you through your career. I call on people that I worked with 20 years ago. I'm still calling on them. And I remember I was headhunted for a role, and I met the chief executive, and I said to him, "Why do you want me?" And he said, "Well, I want your little black book of contacts." Needless to say, I didn't take the job. But it shows you sort of how important that is, that, and they come in so useful. And you may not realize at the time how that person is going to help you in 10 years' time, but I guarantee they will.
That's excellent. Well, thank you so much for spending the time talking to me today. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm sure there are a number of insights in there that will really help people along the way. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda.